The movie begins in a factory near the coast, where the factory owner is anxiously awaiting someone's arrival. A man named Robert Durant soon shows up with his gang. After a thorough check, Robert and his men are allowed inside. Robert is a real estate tycoon with mafia ties, and he's on the verge of forcibly taking control of the factory. The owner refuses to hand it over, prompting Robert to give a signal. One of his men, hiding a gun in a prosthetic leg, starts shooting, killing everyone at the factory. Robert kidnaps the owner and takes control of the factory, even going so far as to cut off the man's fingers. Meanwhile, we are introduced to a scientist named Peyton, who is working on groundbreaking research involving synthetic skin with the help of his lab assistant. His goal is to create synthetic skin to help burn victims. While Peyton successfully creates the skin, it remains stable for only 99 minutes before the cells break down into liquid at the 100th minute. Despite this, Peyton remains hopeful that they can perfect the process soon. Later, Peyton spends time with his girlfriend, Julie, as they reminisce over old photos. The next morning, Julie, who works as a government lawyer, is seen busy with her job. Before she leaves for work, Peyton proposes to her. Julie responds by telling Peyton she loves him, but does not give a clear answer to his proposal. Later on, Julie meets with a wealthy businessman named Lewis, who dreams of building a modern colony that will provide jobs to many people. To acquire the necessary land, Lewis has bribed officials at the Land Commission, and Julie, being a lawyer for the commission, is aware of this. When she confronts him about the bribes, Lewis doesn't deny it, insisting that he's doing it for the greater good. Julie, somewhat convinced by Lewis's intentions, listens as he warns her that Robert is also after the land, and that it would be disastrous if he gets control of it. Meanwhile, Peyton continues his work in the lab, trying to develop stable synthetic skin. During an experiment, a power outage occurs, but Peyton discovers that the synthetic skin has stabilized even after 99 minutes. Excited by this breakthrough, Peyton rushes to tell his assistant that the experiment works in the dark. Just as Peyton is celebrating this success, Robert and his men break into the lab, searching for important papers that are hidden in Peyton's house. They kill Peyton's assistant and brutally burn Peyton's hands before throwing him into a vat of acid. After finding the papers, Robert and his men burn down the laboratory and leave. An explosion occurs, throwing Peyton's body into the nearby river. A few days later, Julie is seen standing by what she believes to be Peyton's grave. However, it's actually the grave of Peyton's assistant, whose face was burned beyond recognition in the explosion, leading everyone to mistakenly think it was Peyton who had died. Meanwhile, Peyton is alive but severely burned and recovering in a hospital. His body is covered in burns, and though the doctors perform surgery, Peyton feels no pain due to nerve damage. However, the side effects of the surgery cause him to develop uncontrollable anger issues. Once Peyton regains consciousness, he escapes the hospital by jumping out of a window. He wanders through the rain, eventually finding Julie. However, when Julie sees him, she doesn't recognize him due to his disfigured face and runs away, terrified. Peyton realizes that he must stay away from Julie until he can fix his face. He returns to the ruins of his lab, feeling heartbroken as he surveys the damage. Determined, he decides to continue his research to recreate the synthetic skin. The next day, Peyton sets up a new lab in an abandoned factory. He resumes his experiments, trying to recreate his face using synthetic skin, but he only has a burned photograph of half of his face to work with. As a result, it will take 570 hours to fully recreate his face. Frustrated, Peyton looks at his burnt hands and vows to take revenge on Robert. That night, Julie attends a party hosted by Lewis. Lewis tries to get close to her, making Julie uncomfortable, so she leaves. Peyton, watching from a distance through a window, spots one of Robert's men who killed his assistant. Later, when the man leaves the party, Peyton ambushes him, tortures him, and forces him to reveal Robert's location. The man tells him that Robert comes every week to collect money and mentions another man involved in the operation, named Paulie. Peyton leaves the man trapped in a gutter, where he is later hit by a bus. The next day, Peyton tracks down Paulie and secretly takes photos of his face and hands, as well as pictures of Paulie's friends. Peyton returns to his lab and creates a synthetic skin mask to perfectly imitate Paulie. Disguised as Paulie, Peyton goes to a restaurant and collects a large briefcase of money before leaving. A short while later, Robert shows up at Paulie's house to ask about the money. Paulie, unaware of what happened, tries to explain that he overslept, but Robert discovers train tickets in his room. This makes Robert suspicious that Paulie was planning to steal the money and escape. As a result, Robert throws Paulie out of the window, killing him instantly. Paulie's body lands on a car below, while Peyton, still disguised as Paulie, sits on a nearby bench. A woman screams in shock when she sees Peyton, mistaking him for Paulie. Peyton starts to feel his synthetic skin cracking as the timer shows 98 minutes. He quickly leaves and rushes back to his laboratory, feeling remorse for having killed 2 people. Later, back at his lab, Peyton tries to work on the synthetic skin again, but grows frustrated when it still fails to stabilize after 99 minutes. In a fit of rage, he begins to break things around him and is haunted by flashbacks of that horrible day. Just as his anger intensifies, the computer announces that the synthetic skin of his face is ready. The next day, Peyton dons his newly crafted synthetic face and goes to the cemetery to meet Julie. When Julie sees him, she's initially frightened, but Peyton manages to calm her down. He reveals the truth and asks if she could still love him, even if his face wasn't the same. Julie, torn and confused, tells him she's unsure. That night, Robert contacts one of his men, complaining that Paulie's actions have caused him a significant loss. He also mentions that he will personally go to Chinatown to recover the money. Peyton, who has been listening in on Robert's conversation through a transmitter, decides to take action. He creates a synthetic skin mask of Robert. The next day, Peyton, disguised as Robert, goes to a bookstore. There, he points a gun at the shopkeeper and looks directly into the security camera, announcing Robert's name. The police are soon alerted and arrive at Robert's house to arrest him. Meanwhile, Peyton, still disguised as Robert, heads to Chinatown to collect the money, keeping a close eye on the 99-minute mark. Just as he is about to leave, the real Robert shows up, stunned to see someone who looks exactly like him. Robert orders his men to shoot, but they are confused about whom to target. As Peyton's synthetic skin begins to melt, he creates a distraction and escapes. Later, Peyton meets Julie at a carnival. At the carnival, Peyton becomes enraged when a shopkeeper refuses to give him a prize, and in a fit of anger, he breaks the shopkeeper's fingers. As this happens, Peyton's synthetic skin starts to melt again, and he runs away. Julie, shocked by his violent behavior, follows him back to the factory. There, she discovers different masks and realizes that something terrible has happened to Peyton. She calls out to him, pleading for him not to hide, telling him that she can help. Peyton watches her from a distance, but does not reveal himself. The next day, Julie visits Lewis's office. She tells Lewis that Peyton is still alive. As Lewis goes to answer a phone call, Julie stumbles upon the commission papers that were supposed to have been destroyed in the fire. It is then revealed that Robert works for Lewis, and it was Lewis who ordered the lab to be burned. Lewis also confesses that he was responsible for Peyton's death. Horrified, Julie leaves the office in shock. As soon as she leaves, Lewis calls Robert, informing him that Peyton is still alive. Lewis orders Robert to follow Julie. Later, Julie goes to Peyton's factory, where Peyton watches her from the window. While Peyton is distracted, Robert and his men arrive and kidnap Julie. Peyton quickly follows them, preparing to rescue her, but Robert shows up in a helicopter and starts shooting at him. Peyton manages to dodge the bullets and retreat into his factory. Unfortunately, Robert's men storm the factory as well, opening fire on Peyton. Peyton cleverly begins eliminating Robert's men one by one, using their look-alike synthetic skins that he had prepared in advance. After taking them all down, he confronts Robert in the helicopter. Robert tries to throw Peyton from the aircraft, but Peyton clings to a support rope hanging from the helicopter. Desperate, Robert orders the pilot to increase the helicopter's speed in an attempt to kill Peyton, but his plan fails. Spotting a nearby truck, Peyton ties the rope to it, causing the helicopter to crash and explode. Sometime later, Robert goes to meet Lewis. However, it's actually Peyton disguised as Robert, using his synthetic skin. Lewis, unaware of the ruse, has Julie with him and leads Robert to the top floor of a building. Once there, Lewis pulls off the mask, revealing Peyton's true face. A fierce battle ensues between Peyton and Lewis. In the end, Peyton overpowers Lewis and throws him off the building, killing him. Julie, now seeing Peyton's real face, tells him that while he can wear artificial skin, she will never leave him. But Peyton, filled with sorrow, tells her that he is dead both inside and out. He explains that he's become a monster, someone no one could possibly live with. With that, he leaves Julie behind, walking away. Julie desperately follows him, calling his name, but Peyton disappears into the crowd. Before vanishing forever, Peyton takes one last look at Julie. The movie concludes with Peyton's voiceover saying, "I am everyone and no one, everywhere and nowhere, Call me Darkman,